I have died 7 times in the Emperor's service. 7 deaths, each one absolute, each one a darkness that should have been final, each one followed by a light that called me back to flesh that had ceased to function, to lungs that had stopped breathing, to a heart that had forgotten how to beat. I do not know why he returns me. I do not know what purpose my continued existence serves in his ineffable design. I know only that I wake again and again in bodies that bear the scars of endings that did not take. And I continue to serve because service is the only response that faith permits. I am Seraphina of the Burning Rose. I was there at the beginning, when the daughters of the Emperor first lifted their weapons against the monster who had claimed to speak with the Emperor's voice. I was there when Alicia Dominica walked into the Sanctum Imperialis and emerged transformed, bearing truths that would reshape the Imperium's faith forever. I was there when the orders were founded, when the sisterhood first took the shape that it has maintained across 4 millennia of unceasing war. And I am here now, in this late hour of the 41st millennium, watching as everything we built strains against threats that would have been unimaginable to the women who first swore their oaths in the ashes of the age of apostasy. 4,000 years. The number seems impossible when I speak it, a span of time that no human consciousness should be able to contain. But I contain it through whatever grace the Emperor has granted me, and I carry within my memory the faces of sisters beyond counting who have served and died and been forgotten by all except those of us who cannot forget. This is their history. This is our history. The history of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, the daughters of the Emperor who have held the line of faith against every enemy that would see humanity's soul extinguished. I tell it not as scholars tell it, not as dates and battles and the names of saints arranged in proper sequence. I tell it as I lived it, as I died for it, as I have returned to serve it again and again, across centuries that have blurred together into a single continuous act of devotion. The beginning was blood. This is the truth that the official histories sometimes soften, that the hymns we sing in our chapels render as righteous fury rather than the desperate violence it actually was. The Adepta Sororitas was not founded in glory. We were founded in betrayal, in horror, in the moment when women who had believed themselves servants of the Emperor discovered that they had been serving a madman who had stolen his name, Goje van Dire. Even now, 4,000 years later, speaking that name aloud feels like speaking a curse. He was the 52nd ecclesiarch, the spiritual leader of the Adeptus Ministorum, the voice of the imperial creed across 1,000,000 worlds. He should have been a shepherd of souls, a guardian of humanity's faith. Instead, he became a tyrant whose reign of blood nearly destroyed the Imperium from within. I was young when Van Dire rose to power, young in the way that sisters who have not yet died are young, fierce in my certainty, absolute in my devotion, convinced that the hierarchies of the ecclesiarchy represented the Emperor's will, made manifest in institutional form. When Van Dire spoke, I heard the voice of divine authority. When he commanded, I obeyed with the zealous obedience that my training had instilled. We all did. The daughters of the Emperor, as we were known then, were his personal guard, warriors selected for our skill and our faith, dedicated to the protection of the man we believed spoke for the master of mankind himself. We killed for him. We died for him. We committed acts that I cannot speak of even now without feeling the weight of guilt that no amount of penance has ever fully lifted. He used us. This is the simple truth beneath all the theological complexity that later scholars have wrapped around the age of apostasy. Goje van Dire saw women of faith, women of violence, women whose devotion made them incapable of questioning the orders they received. And he saw tools. He pointed us at his enemies, and we destroyed them. He pointed us at the innocent, and we destroyed them too, because he told us they were guilty, and we believed him, because how could the voice of the emperor lie? The reign of blood lasted 70 years. 70 years of purges and persecutions, of worlds burned and populations decimated, of the ecclesiarchy transformed from an institution of faith into an instrument of terror. The Imperium tore itself apart in civil war, as those who recognized Vandire's madness struggled against those who remained loyal to his twisted vision. Billions died, perhaps trillions. The numbers are beyond accurate counting, lost in the chaos of a conflict that touched every sector of imperial space. And through it all, we served, the daughters of the emperor, blind in our devotion, deaf to the screams of those we slaughtered, convinced that every atrocity we committed was sanctified by the authority of the man we protected. We were not evil. I must believe this, must cling to this truth, even as I acknowledge the evil we enacted. We were deceived. We were used. We were weapons aimed at targets we did not choose by a hand that we trusted absolutely. The breaking came on Terra itself, in the ecclesiarchal palace, where Vandira had made his seat of power. The forces arrayed against him had finally reached the homeworld, had fought their way through defenses that had cost millions of lives to breach. The Adeptus Custodes themselves, the Emperor's own guardians, had declared Vandire traitor and moved against him. The end was inevitable. Everyone could see it. Everyone except us. We prepared to die in his defense. This is what I remember most clearly from those final hours. The certainty that we would fall protecting the man we served, that our deaths would be meaningful because they would be offered in service to the Emperor's voice, that the enemies breaking down the doors were the true heretics and we were the faithful, holding the line against apostasy. And then Alicia Dominica walked into the Sanctum Imperialis. I do not know what arrangement allowed it. I do not know what negotiations or manipulations or desperate gambits convinced the custodes to permit our leader to enter the most sacred space in the Imperium, to stand in the presence of the Emperor himself, to receive whatever revelation awaited her in that chamber where no sister had ever been permitted to tread. I only know that she went in as one woman and emerged as another, and the truth she carried burned away every lie we had been fed across 7 decades of misdirected service. I saw her face when she returned. I saw the tears that streamed from eyes that had looked upon something that no words could adequately describe. I saw the certainty that had replaced the certainty we had all carried. Not the false certainty of obedience to Vandir, but the true certainty of one who had stood in the Emperor's light and understood, finally, what that light demanded. He is not the Emperor's voice, she said. The words were simple. The words changed everything. He has never been the Emperor's voice. We have been serving a lie. Vandira died that day. Alicia Dominica herself struck the blow, her blade finding the throat of the man who had used us as instruments of his atrocity. I watched him fall. I watched the blood spread across the marble floors of the palace he had defiled with his presence. And I felt something break inside me. Not faith, but the corruption that had masqueraded as faith, the false certainty shattering to reveal the true certainty beneath. We had been wrong. We had killed for a liar, died for a deceiver, committed sins beyond counting in service to a madman who had claimed divine authority he never possessed. The guilt of that realization has never fully left me. I carry it still, 4,000 years later, a weight that no absolution can entirely lift. But I also carry what came after, the Reformation, the rebirth, the transformation of the daughters of the Emperor into something that could never again be so easily deceived. From the ashes of the age of apostasy, the Adepta Sororitas would rise, and I would rise with them again and again, dying and returning to serve a truth that I had finally learned to recognize. This is how we began, in blood and betrayal, and the terrible clarity that comes only when everything you believed has been revealed as a lie. This is the foundation upon which 4,000 years of faith has been built. The Reformation came swiftly, born from necessity rather than careful deliberation. Sebastian Thor, the man who would become the greatest ecclesiarch in imperial history, understood that the structures which had permitted Vandire's rise could not be allowed to persist unchanged. The Adeptus Ministorum had failed. Its hierarchies had enabled tyranny. Its institutions had been corrupted so thoroughly that 70 years of atrocity had been committed in the Emperor's name by those who genuinely believed they served his will. Something had to change. Everything had to change. The decree passive emerged from the councils that reshaped the ecclesiarchy in the years following Vandire's death. Its provisions were simple, its implications vast. The Adeptus Ministorum would be forbidden from maintaining men under arms. Never again would the ecclesiarchy command military forces that might be turned against the Imperium itself. Never again would a single man wield both spiritual and martial authority sufficient to plunge humanity into civil war. But the Imperium is a realm besieged. Faith without the capacity for violence is faith that cannot defend itself, cannot protect the faithful, cannot purge the heresy that constantly threatens to corrupt humanity's soul. The ecclesiarchy needed warriors. The decree forbade them. The solution lay in a single word, a distinction that lawyers and theologians would debate for millennia to come: men. The decree, passive, forbade men under arms. It said nothing of women. From this loophole, this deliberate ambiguity that Sebastian Thor almost certainly intended from the moment he drafted the decree, the Adepta Sororitas was born. Not as a new organization, but as a transformation of what had existed before. The daughters of the Emperor reforged into something that could serve the ecclesiarchy's martial needs while technically complying with restrictions designed to prevent the ecclesiarchy from wielding martial power. I watched the transformation happen. I was there when Alicia Dominica, her hands still stained with the blood of the tyrant she had slain, knelt before Sebastian Thor and pledged the loyalty of her sisters to the reformed ecclesiarchy. I was there when the first convents were established, when the orders began to take shape, when the structure that would define our sisterhood for 4,000 years was laid down in founding documents that still guide us today. 6 orders, militant, emerged from that founding, 6 bloodlines of faith, each one tracing its lineage to one of the companions who had accompanied Alicia Dominica into the Sanctum Imperialis, each one carrying forward a distinct tradition of service that reflected the character of its founding saint. The Order of the Ebon Chalice, first among equals, founded by Alicia Dominica herself. They are the keepers of the original flame, the sisters who maintain the traditions laid down in the Reformation's earliest days, with a purity that borders on obsession. Their convent on Ophelia Sevum has never fallen to any enemy, has never been breached by any assault, has stood for 4 millennia as a testament to the faith that Dominica kindled in the ashes of the age of apostasy. The Order of the Valorous Heart, founded by Lucia, who took upon herself the guilt of the sisterhood's service to Vandir, and transformed that guilt into a drive for penance that burns hotter than any external flame. They are the sisters who remember what we were, who carry the weight of our sins as fuel for righteousness. who believe that redemption can only be earned through suffering and sacrifice in measures that exceed what we inflicted during the reign of blood. The Order of the Fiery Heart, founded by Catherine, whose passion for the Emperor's truth manifested as righteous fury that she passed to all who followed her. They are the Sisters of the Flame, the warriors who believe that zeal itself is a weapon, that faith burning hot enough can purify any corruption, that the Emperor's enemies deserve not merely death, but annihilation in fires that cleanse their very souls from existence. The Order of Our Martyred Lady, founded by Silvana in honor of those who died fighting against Vanda's tyranny before the truth was revealed to the daughters of the Emperor. They wear black in mourning for sisters who fell on the wrong side of a war they should never have been fighting. And they carry that mourning into battle as a reminder of what misplaced faith can cost. The Order of the Sacred Rose, founded by Arabella, whose contemplation of the Emperor's nature led her to a faith expressed through serenity rather than fury, through precision rather than passion. They are the sisters who kill in silence, who approach warfare as liturgy, whose battles unfold with the measured grace of ceremonies performed in the Emperor's honor. The Order of the Argent Shroud, founded by Silvana's companion Saria, who believed that actions spoke more truly than words, that faith was demonstrated through deeds rather than declarations. They do not speak during battle. They do not cry out in victory or scream in defeat. They simply serve in silence that honors the Emperor more profoundly than any hymn. 6 orders, 6 traditions, 6 interpretations of what it means to be a daughter of the Emperor in the age that followed the apostasy. And from these 6, across 4,000 years, countless successors have emerged. The orders minoris, each one tracing its lineage back to the original 6, each one carrying forward the legacy of founders who learned faith in the crucible of the greatest betrayal the ecclesiarchy had ever suffered. I have served with all of them. I have died beside sisters of the ebon chalice, on walls that could not be held, have advanced with the valorous heart into battles that could not be won, have burned alongside the fiery heart in purges that left nothing behind but ash and silence. I have worn black with our martyred lady, have learned serenity from the sacred rose, have fought in silence beside sisters of the Argent Shroud, who communicated everything necessary through gesture and glance and the precise application of violence. Each order believes itself closest to the Emperor's truth. Each order maintains traditions that sometimes conflict with the traditions of their sisters. The theological disputes that have erupted across 4 millennia would fill libraries. Arguments over the proper form of prayer, the correct interpretation of scripture, the precise nature of the Emperor's divinity, and how that divinity should be honored in the taking of heretical lives. We are not monolithic. We have never been monolithic. The Adepta Sororitas is a family, and families argue, and sometimes those arguments spill blood before they are resolved. But we are united in what matters, united in our devotion to the Emperor, united in our determination that what happened under Vandara will never happen again, united in our willingness to die and to kill in defense of a faith that we have earned the right to carry through the suffering of our founding. The Reformation gave us more than military structure. It gave us purpose beyond violence, missions that extended the ecclesiarchy's reach without requiring the men under arms that the decree passive forbade. The Order's Hospitaller emerged to tend the wounded, to care for the sick, to bring the Emperor's healing to those who had known only suffering. They are not warriors in the conventional sense, but they serve in war nonetheless, maintaining field hospitals behind the lines, extracting wounded soldiers from battlefields where retrieval should be impossible. keeping alive men and women who by all rights should have died so that they might fight again in the Emperor's name. The Order's dialogues emerged to spread the Emperor's word, to translate the sacred texts into languages that might reach every human soul, to ensure that no corner of the Imperium remained ignorant of the faith that bound humanity together. They are scholars and missionaries, preachers and propagandists, their weapons words rather than bolters, but no less potent in the wars that the ecclesiarchy wages for humanity's soul. The Order's famulus emerged to serve as advisors to imperial nobility, to guide the great houses of the Imperium toward decisions that served the Emperor's will, to ensure that secular power remained aligned with sacred purpose. They move through courts and councils, influencing policies that affect billions, shaping the Imperium's direction through whispers and suggestions that carry the weight of the ecclesiarchy's authority. The Order's pronators emerged to recover and protect the relics of the faithful, the sacred artifacts that carry the Emperor's blessing through their connection to saints and martyrs of ages past. They braved dangers that would break ordinary soldiers to retrieve objects whose holy significance outweighs any consideration of personal survival, and they guard those objects against theft or corruption with devotion that admits no compromise. Together, the Order's militant and the non-militant orders form a sisterhood that touches every aspect of imperial life. Heal and we kill. We teach and we silence. We advise and we execute. We preserve the sacred and destroy the profane. There is no function that the ecclesiarchy requires that we do not perform, no mission too dangerous or too delicate for sisters trained since childhood to serve without question and die without hesitation. This is what we became. This is what Sebastian Thor and Alicia Dominica built from the ruins of the daughters of the Emperor. Not merely an army of faithful women, but an institution woven into the very fabric of the Imperium, a sisterhood whose influence extends far beyond the battlefields where our most visible members wage their wars. 4,000 years. The number still staggers me when I contemplate it. 4,000 years of service, of sacrifice, of faith, maintained through horrors that would have broken any lesser devotion. 4,000 years of sisters born and trained and deployed and killed, each generation passing the torch to the next, each death adding to a legacy that grows heavier with each passing century. I have watched that legacy build. I have contributed to it through 7 deaths and 7 returns, and centuries of service that have taken me across the galaxy and back again more times than I can count. I have seen the Adepta Sororitas grow from a few thousand survivors of the age of apostasy to an organization that numbers in the millions, our convents scattered across every segmentum, our influence touching every world where the ecclesiarchy maintains a presence. We are the Emperor's daughters. We are the brides of the Golden Throne. We are the faith militant made manifest, devotion given form, and armed with bolter and blade. And our history was only beginning. The age of apostasy gave us birth. The millennia that followed would test us in ways that even Alicia Dominica could not have foreseen, would demand sacrifices that would make the reign of blood seem like mere prelude, would prove again and again that the faith forged in that founding crucible was strong enough to endure anything the galaxy could inflict upon it. I was there for all of it. I died through all of it. And I returned again and again to serve a truth that had become the only truth I knew. The first centuries after the Reformation were centuries of fire. The age of apostasy had left wounds across the Imperium that would take generations to heal. Worlds that had fallen away from the Emperor's light during the chaos. Populations that had been seduced by heresies that flourished in the absence of centralized authority. cults and sects and false prophets who had risen in the vacuum that Vandir's tyranny had created. The ecclesiarchy was reformed, yes, renewed in its purpose and purified in its doctrine, but reformation meant nothing if the faithful had no faith left to reform. The wars of faith began in the century, following Sebastian Thor's ascension to the ecclesiarchal throne. They would continue in various forms for the next 4,000 years. I fought in the first of them, the purging of Corinthus, as the histories name it now, though we who were there called it simply the work that needed doing. Corinthus was a cardinal world that had fallen entirely to a heresy called the cult of the whispered truth, a faith that taught that the emperor was not divine, but merely a powerful psyker whose death had released his soul into the warp, where it had been consumed by the very powers he had sought to oppose. They worshipped what they believed the emperor had become. They worshipped chaos wearing the emperor's face. 12 orders descended on Corinthus. 40,000 sisters, supported by elements of the Imperial Guard and the naval assets of Battlefleet Obscurus. We expected a war of months. It became a war of years, 7 years of grinding attrition through hive cities that had been fortified by generations of heretics who knew that their faith meant death and had chosen to make that death as costly as possible. I died twice on Corinthus. The first death came in the underhive of Corinthus Primus, where a cultist's blade found the gap between my gorget and my helm and opened my throat to the bone. I bled out in a corridor that stank of chemical runoff and burning promethium, my sisters fighting over my body as I faded into darkness. The second death came in the final assault on the whispered cathedral, the heretic's holiest site, where a booby-trapped reliquary exploded as I attempted to retrieve what I believed was a fragment of Saint Celestine's armor. The explosion vaporized everything from my waist down. I lived long enough to watch my sisters complete the purge, to see the cathedral burn, to hear the hymns of victory before the blood loss finally claimed me. Both times I returned. Both times I woke in a hospitaller's care, with wounds that should have been fatal somehow healed, with memories of darkness interrupted by light, with the certain knowledge that the Emperor had use for me still and would continue to have use for me until his purpose was fulfilled. Corinthus was only the beginning. The wars of faith swept across the Imperium in waves, each one responding to heresies that had taken root during the apostasy, each one demanding the service of sisters who had been trained since childhood for exactly such work. We became the tip of the ecclesiarchy's spear, the first wave of every crusade launched to reclaim worlds that had strayed from the Emperor's light. Where the Imperial Guard brought numbers and the Space Marines brought devastation, we brought faith, the unshakable certainty that our cause was righteous, that our enemies were damned, that every death we inflicted and every death we suffered served a purpose that transcended the immediate tactical concerns of any single battle. The plague of unbelief came 3 centuries after the founding, a heresy that spread not through cults or false prophets, but through doubt itself. The apostate Cardinal Bucaris proclaimed that the Emperor was not merely dead, but had never been divine, that the Imperium's faith was a lie perpetuated by those who profited from humanity's credulity, that true enlightenment lay in the rejection of all the superstitions that the ecclesiarchy had cultivated across millennia of manipulation. His message found fertile ground in populations still traumatized by the rain of blood, still wondering how a faith that permitted Vandir could be worth maintaining. The plague spread across 4 sectors before it was contained. Bucaris himself commanded armies that rivaled the forces available to the legitimate ecclesiarchy, his charisma drawing billions to a cause that promised liberation from the tyranny of faith. The war against him lasted 12 years, and cost more lives than the age of apostasy itself, not because his forces were superior to ours, but because his message was seductive in ways that mere military power could never match. I fought against Bukharis at the siege of Gathalamor, where his forces attempted to claim a cardinal world that would have given his heresy legitimacy it could not otherwise achieve. 30,000 sisters held the walls of the ecclesiastical palace against 2 million of his followers, faithful women dying by the hundreds each day, to prevent a breach that would have meant the fall of everything we had rebuilt since the Reformation. We held for 7 months. We held until reinforcements arrived. We held because holding was what we did, what we had always done, what we would always do until the last sister fell and there was no one left to hold. Bukharis died on Gathalamor. Not by my hand. I was recovering from my 3rd death when his forces finally broke, but by the blade of Canoness Palmyro, of the Order of our Martyred Lady, who cut him down as he attempted to flee the battlefield. He had thought himself destined to win. His death ended the plague of unbelief as an organized threat, though the doubts he had cultivated would linger in human hearts for centuries to come. The millennium that followed was a millennium of consolidation, of the Adepta Sororitas growing from a reformed institution into a power that touched every corner of the Imperium. Our convents multiplied, our numbers swelled. The Orders Minoris emerged as daughter organizations of the original 6, each one carrying forward traditions adapted to the specific needs of the sectors they served. We became ubiquitous, not as numerous as the Imperial Guard, not as devastating as the Space Marines, but present in ways that those organizations could never achieve, woven into the fabric of Imperial society rather than standing apart from it. I watched the growth happen. I served in convents across a dozen sectors, trained novices who would themselves train novices across centuries I would not see, laid foundations that would support structures I would not live to witness completed. This is the strange gift of my condition, not merely longevity, but continuity, the ability to see the consequences of actions taken centuries before, to understand how the decisions of one generation shape the options available to the next. The Thorian Reformation transformed our theology in the 32nd millennium, a movement that taught the Emperor's divinity could manifest through chosen vessels, that saints were not merely exemplars, but genuine avatars of his will, that the miracles we witnessed on battlefields across the galaxy were not metaphor, but literal intervention, by a God who had never ceased to act in defense of his children. The Reformation divided the sisterhood as thoroughly as any heresy. Orders that embraced the new theology against orders that clung to older interpretations. Sisters who saw living saints as proof of the Emperor's power, against sisters who feared that venerating mortals would lead to the same errors that had enabled Vandire's rise. I believed. After 7 deaths and 7 returns, after centuries of service in which I had witnessed things that could not be explained by any material cause, I could not help but believe. The Emperor was divine, his will manifested through those he chose, and the Adepta Sororitas, born from betrayal and forged in penance, had been chosen as instruments of that will in ways that transcended the merely military function we had been founded to serve. The wars continued. They always continued. The Imperium exists in a state of perpetual conflict, besieged by enemies without and within, threatened by forces that would require millennia to fully catalogue. The Adepta Sororitas fought them all. We fought the Orcs on 100 worlds, our faith proof against the primal terror that the greenskin hordes inspired in lesser soldiers. I died my 4th death on Armageddon during the Second War, overwhelmed by a tide of Goths whose numbers simply exceeded what any defense could withstand. I woke to find the war still raging, still demanding the service of every sister capable of holding a bolter. We fought the Eldar in the Webway Wars, pursuing Xenos raiders into dimensions that human minds were not designed to comprehend. I lost sisters to madness as often as to enemy action in those campaigns, watched faithful women break under the strain of perceiving realities that contradicted everything they believed about the universe's nature. The Eldar were not merely enemies. They were evidence of a cosmos far stranger and far older than the imperial creed acknowledged. And some sisters could not reconcile that evidence with the faith that had defined their existence. We fought the forces of chaos in numbers beyond counting, the great enemy that lurked behind every other threat, the corruption that could claim worlds and souls and entire sectors if left unchecked. I have seen sisters fall to the whispers of the ruinous powers, have watched women I loved twist into things that had to be destroyed before they could spread their corruption further. The Chaos Gods do not distinguish between faithful and faithless. They hunger for all souls, and the souls of the devoted burn brightest in their sight. And we fought humanity itself again and again in wars against heretics and traitors, and those who simply chose to reject the Emperor's rule. This was always the hardest service, the duty that cost us most dearly. Killing Xenos required only the hatred that came naturally to those who had been raised on tales of alien atrocity. Killing the corrupted required only the righteous fury that our training instilled. But killing humans who had simply chosen differently, who worshipped false gods, or followed false prophets, or simply refused to bend the knee, this required something that mere training could not provide. It required certainty, the certainty that we were right and they were wrong, the certainty that their deaths served the Emperor's purpose, even when that purpose was invisible to mortal eyes, the certainty that the faith which drove us was true, was worthy, was worth the blood we spilled in its name. I have carried that certainty for 4,000 years. I have killed in its name, died in its name, returned to kill and die again in service to a truth that I have never permitted myself to doubt. But doubt exists. It exists in the small hours when sleep will not come, in the moments between battles when the faces of the dead surface unbidden, in the questions that I have never spoken aloud, because speaking them would be to admit that they exist. What if we are wrong? What if the Emperor we serve is not the God we believe him to be? What if the faith that has sustained us across 4 millennia is merely another version of the lie that Vandur told? A more sophisticated deception that we have embraced because embracing it is easier than confronting the possibility that our sacrifices have meant nothing. I do not have answers to these questions. I may never have answers, but I continue to serve regardless, because service is all I know, and faith is all I have. And the alternative, the emptiness that would remain if faith were stripped away, is a void I cannot bear to contemplate. The Adepta Sororitas has endured 4,000 years of war, because we do not permit ourselves to ask the questions that would unravel us. We believe because belief is required. We serve because service is demanded. We die because dying is the price of the devotion we have pledged. And somewhere, in the space between the certainty we proclaim and the doubts we suppress, the truth waits to be discovered. I have been searching for it across 7 lifetimes. I am searching for it still. I met Saint Celestine on the walls of Kasser Kraf as Cardia died around us. I had heard of her, of course. Every sister had heard of her. The living saint, the woman who had died and returned so many times that her resurrections had become doctrine, proof manifest, of the Emperor's intervention in mortal affairs. She had first appeared during the Palatine Crusade in the 38th millennium, a sister of our martyred lady who had fallen in battle and risen, wreathed in golden light. Her wounds healed, her power magnified beyond anything her mortal form should have contained. She had died again. She had returned again. She had become something that was no longer merely a sister, but a vessel for the Emperor's will, a conduit through which his divinity touched the material realm. I had never seen her. In 4,000 years of service, across 7 deaths and 7 returns of my own, our paths had never crossed. She appeared where she was needed most, and I appeared where I was needed. And the galaxy is vast enough that 2 souls can spend millennia in the Emperor's service without ever occupying the same battlefield. Until Cadia, until the 13th Black Crusade, until Abaddon the Despoiler finally achieved what he had been attempting for 10,000 years and tore the heart out of the Imperium's defenses against the Eye of Terror. The 13th Black Crusade was not a war. Wars have beginnings and endings, objectives and outcomes, the possibility of victory or defeat. What Abaddon brought to Cadia was annihilation, the culmination of 10,000 years of hatred, the full strength of the traitor legions and their demonic allies focused on a single point, with the intent of breaking through at any cost. He did not come to conquer Cadia. He came to destroy it, to eliminate the fortress world that had stood sentinel against chaos since the Emperor first raised it, to open a wound in reality that would never heal. I was stationed at Casa Kraf when the assault began, attached to a mixed force of sisters from 6 different orders who had been rotating through Cadian postings for centuries. We had fought chaos incursions before. Cadia's purpose was to fight chaos incursions, to bleed the Black Crusades until they could be pushed back into the Eye. We believed we would fight this one as we had fought all the others, with faith and fury and the stubborn refusal to yield that had defined the Cadian Gate's defenders across millennia. We did not understand what was coming. The skies burned. I mean this literally. The atmosphere itself ignited as the Blackstone fortress that Abaddon had claimed discharged weapons that predated humanity's existence. Technologies from the war in heaven turned against a world that had never been designed to withstand such power. I watched Casa cities that had stood for 10,000 years vaporize in instants, saw defense lines that had held against every previous crusade simply cease to exist, heard the screams of millions dying in fires that no faith could shield against. And still we held. This is what Cadians do. This is what sisters do. We held because holding was required, because retreat was impossible, because somewhere in the calculus of faith there is no variable for surrender. We held as the world died around us, as the ground cracked and the seas boiled, and the pylons that had stabilized Cadian space for millennia shattered one by one under bombardment that should have been impossible. I was on the walls when Celestine arrived. She descended from a sky that was more fire than air, her wings spreading light across a battlefield that had known only darkness for days. The Gemini Superior flanked her, her eternal companions, sisters who had died at her side and been resurrected alongside her, bound to her fate by bonds that transcended individual identity. She carried a blade that blazed with the Emperor's light, and where she struck, traitors died, and where she walked, the faithful found strength they had not known they possessed. I saw her face. I saw the certainty in her eyes, the absolute conviction of one who had stood in the Emperor's presence and returned with knowledge that mortal minds could barely contain. I saw what I had believed myself to be, a vessel for divine purpose, a soul that death could not hold, a servant whose resurrections proved that the Emperor's hand guided her path. And I saw something else, something that I have never spoken of until now. something that the official accounts do not record, because recording it would raise questions that the ecclesiarchy prefers to leave unasked. I saw exhaustion. Beneath the radiance, behind the certainty, there was weariness so profound that it made my 4,000 years of service seem like an afternoon's exertion. Celestine had been dying and returning for 3 millennia. 3,000 years of sacrifice, of being called back from whatever peace death offered to serve again on battlefields that never stopped demanding her presence. 3,000 years of carrying the weight of faith that billions placed upon her shoulders, of being the proof that the Emperor intervened, of embodying hope for those who had no other hope to cling to. She was tired, the living saint, the proof of the Emperor's divinity, the avatar of his will made manifest. She was tired in ways that I recognized, because I had felt the same weariness in my own soul, the same question that I had never permitted myself to fully ask. How long? How long must we serve? How long must we die and return and die again? Is there an end to this, a destination toward which all these sacrifices point? Or are we merely fuel being fed into a fire that will never stop burning? Our eyes met across the chaos of the battle. For a single instant, between one heartbeat and the next, I saw recognition in her gaze. The acknowledgement of a kindred soul, another who had walked the path of resurrection, another who knew what it cost to be called back from the darkness again and again. And then the moment passed, and she was moving again, her blade carving light through darkness, her presence rallying defenders who had been moments from breaking. I died on Cadia, my 5th death, caught in the collapse of a fortification that Abaddon's forces had finally breached after 17 days of constant assault. The rubble buried me, crushed me, ended me in darkness that I welcomed, because darkness meant rest, meant release, meant the possibility that this death might finally be the last. It was not the last. I woke on a ship fleeing Cadia's death, my wounds healed by hospitalers who told me that I had been recovered from rubble that should have been my tomb, that my heart had stopped for 7 hours before it suddenly resumed, that my survival was a miracle that they could not explain through any medical mechanism they understood. The Emperor, they said, the Emperor had preserved me. The Emperor had called me back because my service was not complete, because he had purpose for me still, because faith like mine could not be permitted to end while faith was still needed. I did not tell them about the exhaustion I had seen in Celestine's eyes. I did not tell them about the doubt that had been growing in my heart across 4 millennia of service, the questions that I had suppressed but never silenced. I accepted their explanation because accepting was easier than explaining, and I returned to service because service was all I knew, and I carried within me a weight that had grown heavier with each resurrection. Cadia fell. The planet itself was destroyed, broken apart by the Blackstone Fortress's final assault, reduced to fragments that tumbled through a void that had become a wound in reality. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, tore across the galaxy in the wake of Cadia's destruction, a scar of warp energy that split the Imperium in half and plunged countless worlds into darkness that the Astronomican's light could no longer penetrate. I watched the galaxy change. I watched the Imperium that I had served for 4,000 years transform into something that the founders of the Adepta Sororitas would not have recognized. A realm besieged not merely by external enemies, but by the fundamental breakdown of the structures that had held it together. The Great Rift was not merely a tactical obstacle. It was a wound in the Emperor's domain, proof that the powers of chaos had achieved a victory that 10 millennia of war had not been able to prevent. The sisters fought on. We always fight on. In the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy that had been cut off from Terra's light. Our orders maintained the faith against odds that should have been impossible. In the Imperium Sanctus, we rallied to the defense of worlds that had thought themselves safe, and discovered that safety was an illusion that the Great Rift had burned away. We died in numbers that eclipsed the losses of any previous era, gave ourselves to the Emperor's service in measures that would have bankrupted our reserves if faith could be measured in such terms. And Celestine fought with us. The living saint appeared wherever the need was greatest, her resurrections coming faster now, her deaths more frequent, her returns carrying less of the radiance they had once held. I saw her 3 more times in the years following Cadia's fall. On Ophelius VII, when the Chaos fleets threatened to overrun the heart of the ecclesiarchy, on Gathalamor, when the word-bearers sought to claim what their ideological ancestors had failed to take during the plague of unbelief. On Luna itself, when the enemies of mankind reached the Sol system and threatened the throne world itself. Each time she was dimmer. Each time the exhaustion I had glimpsed on Cadia was more visible, less hidden behind the radiance that her faith projected. She was being worn down, eroded by the demands of a galaxy that needed miracles and would accept no substitute for the one saint who had proven capable of providing them. I spoke to her once in the aftermath of the Battle of Gathalamor, when the defenders had driven back the word-bearers and the immediate crisis had passed. She was standing alone on a wall that overlooked the corpse-strewn battlefield, her wings folded, her blade dark, her eyes fixed on a horizon that neither of us could see. "How do you bear it?" I asked. The question emerged before I could stop it, before the discipline of 4,000 years could suppress the doubt that had been building since I first saw her face on Cadia. How do you return again and again, knowing that there will always be another battle, another death, another call to service that you cannot refuse? She turned to look at me. The radiance that surrounded her in battle was absent now, and I saw the woman beneath the saint, a sister of our martyred lady, a servant of the Emperor, a soul that had been chosen for burdens that no soul should have to carry. "I bear it because I must," she said. Her voice was soft, tired, nothing like the clarion tones that rallied armies and broke the courage of heretics. "I bear it because he asks, and I cannot refuse him. I bear it because the alternative is to abandon those who need me, and I cannot do that. I am not capable of doing that. Do you ever wish it would end?" The question was heresy. I knew it was heresy even as I spoke it, knew that wishing for an end to service was the same as wishing for an end to faith, knew that a sister who could ask such a question had already begun to fall from the Emperor's grace. But she did not condemn me. She did not recoil from my doubt or denounce me to the canonesses, who would have seen such questions as evidence of corruption. She simply looked at me with eyes that had seen the Emperor's light and had been burned by it, had been sustained by it, had been bound to it in ways that permitted no escape. "Every moment," she said, "every moment that I am not in his presence, I wish for the end. But the end does not come because he does not will it. And so I continue, because continuation is the only choice he has left me." I died my 6th death 3 months later, on a nameless world, in the Imperium Nihilus, where a cult of pleasure-seekers had taken root and spread corruption that threatened to engulf the entire subsector. The cultists were not soldiers. They were worshippers of excess, who had never faced true opposition, whose devotion to their dark god had made them dangerous but not skilled. They should not have been able to kill a sister of my experience, but I wanted them to. In the moment when the blade found my heart, I did not fight it. I did not struggle. I let the darkness take me, because the darkness was rest, was release. was the possibility that this time the Emperor would let me stay in whatever peace existed beyond the veil of death. I returned anyway. I woke in a field hospital with a wound that should have been fatal somehow healed, with hospitalers speaking of miracles and providence, with the certainty that the Emperor had called me back because my service was not yet complete. And for the first time in 4,000 years, I was not certain whether to feel grateful or condemned. I have died 7 times in the Emperor's service. The 7th death came on Ophelia the 7th, in the shadow of the convent prioress, where the order's militant maintain their holiest shrines, where the bones of Alicia Dominica rest in a reliquary that has drawn pilgrims for 4 millennia. The enemy was not chaos, not Xenos, not even heretics in any traditional sense. They were citizens of the Imperium who had simply broken under the weight of a galaxy that offered nothing but suffering, who had risen against the institutions that they blamed for their misery, who saw in the Adepta Sororitas not protectors, but oppressors, who enforced a faith that had given them nothing but pain. I could not hate them. This is what I remember most clearly from the battle that ended my 7th life. The absence of the righteous fury that had sustained me through 6 previous deaths. The inability to see these desperate, broken people as enemies, worthy of the hatred my training demanded. They were imperial citizens. They were the faithful, or had been before faith had failed them. They were what all of us might become if the weight of devotion finally exceeded what our souls could bear. They killed me with farming implements, not the sophisticated weapons of chaos cultists or the ancient technologies of Xenos races, but simple tools designed for harvesting crops, repurposed for the harvesting of those they blamed for their suffering. I fell beneath a tide of bodies, felt the crude blades find the gaps in my armor, experienced death not as the heroic culmination of battle against worthy foes, but as the messy, ignoble ending of a woman killed by those she had sworn to protect. And I returned. Of course, I returned. The Emperor's purposes for me were not yet fulfilled. And so I woke once again in a hospitaler's care, once again healed from wounds that should have been fatal, once again called back to a service that I was no longer certain I wished to continue. That was 11 months ago. 11 months of recovery, of contemplation, of questions that I have finally permitted myself to ask aloud, because I am too tired to keep them silent any longer. The Adepta Sororitas has existed for 4,000 years. In that time, we have fought in every corner of the Imperium, have died in numbers beyond accurate counting, have maintained a faith that has cost us everything and given us nothing except the certainty that we serve something greater than ourselves. We have been the ecclesiarchy's sword and shield, the faithful women who hold the line when all other lines have broken, the daughters of the Emperor who prove through our sacrifices that his light has not been extinguished. But what have we accomplished? The question haunts me now in ways it never did before. I have fought for 4 millennia. I have killed heretics and Xenos and traitors beyond number. I have given myself to the Emperor's service with a devotion that admitted no compromise, no doubt, no questioning of the purpose that my deaths were meant to serve. And yet the galaxy is darker now than it was when I first lifted my bolter in his name. The great rift has torn the Imperium apart. Cadia has fallen. Enemies multiply faster than we can destroy them. The faith we have fought to preserve is no closer to victory than it was when Alicia Dominica struck down Vandire and swore that we would never again serve lies. 4,000 years of service, 7 deaths and 7 returns. And what have I accomplished except the postponement of an ending that seems more inevitable with each passing century? I do not know the answer. I am not certain there is an answer, not certain that the questions I am asking admit of resolution. But I have learned something in these 11 months of contemplation, something that the certainty of my previous existence would never have permitted me to perceive. The meaning is not in the victory. The meaning was never in the victory. The Imperium will fall. This is a truth that I have finally allowed myself to acknowledge. A reality that 4,000 years of observation have made impossible to deny. The structures that hold humanity together are failing. The enemies that besiege us grow stronger while we grow weaker. The faith that sustains us is eroded by each generation, that sees more suffering and fewer miracles, more demands and fewer rewards. The Adepta Sororitas will fight until the last sister falls. We'll maintain our vigil until there is no one left to maintain it. We'll die in the Emperor's service until death itself loses meaning. But we will not win. We were never going to win. The war we fight is not a war that can be won. It is a war that can only be continued, a holding action against an ending that approaches regardless of how fiercely we resist it. This should be despair. This should be the breaking point, the moment when faith finally fails, and nothing remains except the emptiness that I have feared since I first glimpsed it in Celestine's exhausted eyes. If victory is impossible, if the cause we serve is doomed, if 4,000 years of sacrifice have accomplished nothing except the delay of an inevitable defeat, then what meaning can our service possibly hold? But despair is not what I feel. What I feel is something stranger, something that my training did not prepare me for, something that I can only describe as peace. The meaning is in the service itself, not in what the service accomplishes, not in the victories it achieves or the enemies it destroys, but in the act of serving, the choice made again and again across centuries and millennia, to stand against the darkness even when standing cannot prevent the darkness from eventually prevailing. We do not fight because we will win. We fight because fighting is what we are, what we have chosen to be, what the Emperor calls us to be, regardless of whether that call will ever be answered with triumph. Every sister who has ever served has known this, whether she acknowledged it or not. Every woman who has donned the armor of the Adepta Sororitas, who has taken up the bolter and the blade, who has pledged her life to a faith that demands everything and promises nothing except more opportunities to give. Every one of them has understood, somewhere beneath the doctrine and the dogma, that the service itself is the meaning. We are not instruments designed to achieve an outcome. We are expressions of something that transcends outcome, demonstrations of a devotion that exists for its own sake, flames that burn not to illuminate a destination, but simply because burning is what flames do. Alicia Dominica understood this. I see it now, looking back across 4,000 years to the moment when she emerged from the Sanctum Imperialis, with tears streaming down her face and certainty burning in her eyes. She did not emerge with a plan for victory. She did not return with a strategy that would ensure the Imperium's survival. She returned with faith, pure faith, faith that existed independent of any promise of reward, faith that demanded nothing except the opportunity to serve. She struck down Vandira, not because striking him down would save the Imperium, but because striking him down was what faith required, what devotion demanded, what service meant when service was stripped of all expectation of return. Celestine understands this too. The exhaustion I saw in her eyes was not despair. It was the weariness of one who has served for 3 millennia, without any illusion that her service will ever be complete. She continues, not because she believes continuation will lead to victory, but because continuation is what the Emperor asks, and she cannot refuse him. and she has found in her inability to refuse something that might be called purpose, or might be called surrender, or might be called simply love. I have served for 4,000 years. I have died 7 times and returned 7 times and killed more than I can count in the name of a faith that I am only now beginning to understand. And what I understand is this: the Emperor does not promise victory. The Emperor does not offer salvation. The Emperor asks only service, only devotion, only the willingness to burn in his name for as long as burning is possible. And this is enough. It has to be enough, because this is what we are, what we have always been, what the Adepta Sororitas was founded to embody in the ashes of the age of apostasy. We are faith, not faith in victory, not faith in reward, not faith that our sacrifices will be remembered or our service will be recognized. Faith in the act of faithful service itself. Faith that the burning matters even when the light it produces illuminates nothing. Faith that meaning exists in the choice to continue even when continuation cannot change the outcome. The Sisters of Battle have held the line for 4,000 years. We have held it not because holding it will prevent the darkness from eventually claiming everything, but because holding is what we do, what we are, what the Emperor has called us to be. We will continue to hold until there is no one left to hold, until the last sister falls and the last bolter falls silent, and the last prayer fades into an imperium that no longer exists to hear it. And even then, even in that final moment, when everything we have fought for has been lost and everything we have believed has been proven futile, even then the service will have mattered. Not because it changed anything, but because we chose it. Because we gave ourselves to it freely, knowing the cost, knowing the odds, knowing that the ending was never in doubt. This is the meaning I have found. This is the answer to the questions that have haunted me across 7 lifetimes of service. The Adepta Sororitas exists not to win, but to serve. And in serving, we become something that victory could never have made us. Proof that humanity is capable of devotion that transcends self-interest, capable of sacrifice that expects no return, capable of faith that persists not because it is rewarded, but because faith is its own reward. I am Seraphina of the Burning Rose. I have died 7 times in the Emperor's service. I will die again, perhaps soon, perhaps in another century, perhaps in another millennium if he chooses to preserve me that long. And when death comes, I will not resist it. But I will not seek it either, not anymore. I will simply continue as I have always continued, as the Sisters of Battle have continued for 4,000 years, and will continue for as long as there are women willing to take up the bolter and the blade in the Emperor's name. This is our history. This is our meaning. This is what it means to be a daughter of the Emperor in an age when the darkness presses closer with each passing year. We burn, we serve, we die, and in dying we become eternal. Not because we live forever, but because the choice to serve forever echoes through time, inspiring those who come after, reminding them that faith is not about outcomes, but about the act of believing itself. The Emperor protects, not through miracles, not through intervention, not through the promise of victory against enemies that multiply beyond counting. He protects through us, through our service, through our sacrifice, through the faith we carry into battles we cannot win, against enemies we cannot defeat, in a war that will never end until the Imperium itself ends. This is enough. This has always been enough. We are the Adepta Sororitas. We are the Sisters of Battle. We are the daughters of the Emperor. And we will serve until service is no longer possible. And then we will serve still, in whatever form service takes beyond the limits of what mortal minds can comprehend. For 4,000 years, we have held the line. We will hold it still. We will hold it forever, in faith, in fury, in the Emperor's name. Amen.